in a while. So anyhow, everybody, so good to see everyone again, and it's an absolute pleasure to introduce today's speaker to you. So Laura Blecha is joining us today for our multi-institutional AGN seminar series. And Laura, after she got her bachelor's degree in physics, she went on with the Cambridge Gates Fellowship and got her master's at Cambridge with Martin Rees as her advisor. And then she went on to Harvard, where she got her PhD. And then after that, she went on to get an ITC postdoctoral fellowship at CFA. And then after that, she received the prestigious Einstein postdoctoral fellowship at University of Maryland, and then went on to get a JSI Prize postdoc fellowship at UMD. And she is now an assistant professor at the University of Florida, where she's been there for quite a few years. I can't keep track of it all.
2017, yeah.
Oh, okay. And so Laura has, numerous awards, as I've mentioned, these prize postdoctoral fellowships and awards starting way back, at the undergraduate level. And she got a Best Thesis Award at Harvard. She's got numerous grants. I've been continuously amazed by how successful she has been at getting NSF funding and NASA funding. And she really has a very broad range of interests in black hole galaxy coevolution and multi-messenger signatures of binary and offset AGNs. She's really been an amazing collaborator of mine and mentor to many of my students serving on PhD committees. And she's just been such an awesome collaborator. I've really enjoyed working with her. And so it's really my pleasure to introduce her today, and she's going to be talking about the dynamics and multi-messenger signatures of supermassive black hole evolution. So I will hand it over to you, Laura.
All right, thanks, Shribita, so much for that lovely introduction. That was very kind, and very happy to be able to present at this seminar series that you started during the pandemic, but has only grown in popularity. So I'm really glad we're still doing this. So yeah, I'm going to talk about some of the work that my group has been doing recently, studying supermassive black hole evolution. I'll just start by introducing my group. Oh no, this isn't going to freeze again on me, is it? All right. So I have a postdoc, Aklan Bomek, who is working in my group and who is on the job market this year, FYI. So keep a lookout for his name. And then 3 graduate students, as well as one that graduated over the summer, Mohammed Sayeb, and many collaborators, too many to list on this slide. A few of them are listed here. And so yes, this is all very collaborative work that I'll be talking about today. So we're interested in supermassive black hole evolution in 2 broad contexts. The first being black holes and their role in galaxy evolution and vice versa. So this includes the role of galaxy mergers in black hole and galaxy coevolution, the origins of these empirical correlations between black hole and host galaxy properties, and the role of AGN feedback in driving galaxy evolution. And we're also interested in black holes as multi-messenger sources. So supermassive black holes can be detected at much lower gravitational wave frequencies than the stellar mass black holes that LIGO has been detecting. And this experiment that's going on right now is 3 different pulsar timing array experiments, which are sensitive to nanohertz frequencies, use ensembles of pulsars observing, or where we're observing the timing from the pulses from all different parts of the sky, and we're looking for spatially correlated deviations of the pulse time arrivals that match the signal we expect from a gravitational wave background. So it's a signature from supermassive black hole binaries emitting at all different frequencies and all different cosmological distances should produce a power law gravitational wave background that we hope to observe. And potentially in the not too distant future, the 12.5-year data release that came out from NanoGrav collaboration last year shows a very interesting correlated noise signature that is not a gravitational wave detection yet, but could very well be the first hint of this gravitational wave background. It is entirely consistent with that expectation. And then LISA, due to launch in the mid-2030s, will be sensitive to millihertz frequencies, and that is an interferometer that will have millions of kilometers arms rather than the few kilometers arms of LIGO, and will be sensitive to gravitational waves from actual black hole merger events of black holes from the lower end of the supermassive black hole spectrum. So I made this little schematic here. So these for these two main contexts, multi-messenger sources and galaxy evolution, there's a whole host of black hole evolutionary processes that we have to understand if we want to make predictions, and if we want to understand observations in either of these contexts. And so supermassive black hole formation, growth, feedback, and dynamics are the four main ones that I've highlighted here. And then my group's work is primarily focused on the simulation side of things, galactic and cosmological scale simulations. But this ties in very closely and has a lot of back and forth with the observational side, electromagnetic observations of AGN and particularly dual AGN and mergers, as well as hopefully very soon gravitational wave observations of supermassive black hole binaries. So just to give a few details about these simulations that we are using. So galaxy scale, so this refers primarily to idealized simulations. So individual galaxies or individual galaxy mergers modeled in isolation. This simulation you're seeing has been processed with radiative transfer code, Sunrise, and now it's fading out to compare to a real galaxy merger image from this recent study led by Mike Koss, where these galaxy mergers were identified based on their ultra-hard X-ray signatures of AGN. You can see all the dust reddening in the center of this nucleus during that final coalescence stage. And you can also see how we have this elliptical galaxy, this transform morphology as the remnant of these two, the merger between these two disk galaxies here. And then we also use cosmological-scale simulations. So this is showing one region of the TNG 50 simulation. So this is showing the buildup of a particular massive galaxy halo. So you're looking at the gas density in the main image, dark matter density in the lower left, and then an inset of zoom in on the central stellar and gas components of this proto-galaxy. So you can see how the cosmological context is often very important here to understand how this assembly process works. It's highly dynamic and rapidly changing, especially at these earlier epochs here. So we generally can't get as much resolution, spatial resolution, when we're modeling a large cosmological volume as we can in an idealized simulation. One thing that we can do is to use a cosmological zoom simulation, where we resimulate the inner region at a higher spatial resolution, and I'll show some results from that type of simulation as well. But the bottom line is that we need all of these together to be able to probe various scales and understand physics happening on each of them. So I'll start by talking about some of the work we've been doing on black hole accretion and growth. So this is these four snapshots here are from that same merger simulation that I showed the first movie of. And so this is focusing on the final coalescence stage, highlighted in blue here on the left. And so these left plots are showing bolometric AGN luminosity versus time, column density along the line of sight to each black hole, and the W1 minus W2 mid-infrared, WISE mid-infrared color, where some standard diagnostics for picking out an AGN are highlighted here. So the takeaway is that these black holes are actively accreting and most heavily obscured right around this final coalescence stage. So this complicates our efforts to understand merger trigger AGN fueling. But we do find that this merger triggered AGN fueling is picked out by these signatures that are, these signatures that are more from the infrared and also from X-rays that are less sensitive to attenuation, hard X-rays, I should say. And so when we, in this study, we looked at the AGN pairs that we picked out by these mid-infrared selection criteria and find that the duty cycle increases towards the smallest pair separations, agreeing very well with what's been found in observations. And this work was led by Shoboda a few years ago, using the WISE AGN and comparing with an optically selected AGN sample from galaxy pairs done by Sarah Ellison. And then follow-up of these has shown that high fractures of them do in fact contain dual nuclei at these close separations. And then complementary results to that have been attained. This is the study I mentioned. This is that observation that the simulation was compared to in that movie I showed earlier. And as I said, these were ultra hard X-ray selected obscured AGN, and keeps doing that. Sorry. And so with this follow-up imaging, a lot of these were revealed to have these dual nuclei on small scales. And so all of these are, of course, very exciting targets for JWST, particularly the ones where we don't see dual nuclei resolved in current imaging. There are likely to be many more on even smaller scales that we haven't resolved yet. So one of my students, July Thomas, has been analyzing black hole growth in the Illustris TNG simulation using the high time resolution ancillary black hole data set from the simulation, which allows us to probe merger-driven accretion in much more detail because of the high time resolution data we have. And so if we look at the normalized, this is the Eddington ratio. I guess I think I labeled this for a physics talk where I didn't want to take time to explain what the Eddington ratio is. So this is the Eddington ratio on the y-axis here. And then in each of these redshift bins, the data are scaled to the time of merger for all of the mergers in that redshift bin. And so you can see there's this enhancement that we see at the highest redshifts that then disappears when we go to lower redshifts. And of course, the accretion rate on average gets lower overall as gas is depleted in these galaxies. But if we look at the subsample of low mass gas-rich mergers, then we see that, and we compare that with a stellar mass and redshift matched sample from the simulation of non-mergers, we see that there is enhancement all the way down to low redshift. And there's an even larger enhancement relative to all non-mergers that aren't from that subsample. So there's a subpopulation of black holes for which mergers do seem to be an important fueling channel. And this is just another way to look at that data in terms of the actual black hole growth. So this is the cumulative fraction of black holes that experience at least a minimum fraction of their growth during merger events. We look at the Z of zero mass of black holes in the simulation and look at how much of that mass was accreted during galaxy merger events via gas accretion. And that's what's being plotted here as these cumulative distributions spend in Z of zero black hole mass on the left and a number of major mergers on the right. And so what you see is that there's pretty consistently a few percent of all growth is happening during mergers in these on average. So that's a pretty minor fraction, right? So this is definitely a subdominant channel for the black holes acquiring their mass. But then there is this tail of massive black holes that have accumulated, that have gone through multiple mergers and have accumulated a more substantial fraction of tens or even more than 50% of their growth during mergers. So again, the conclusion here is that mergers are an important fueling channel for some subpopulations of black holes, but are subdominant overall. Right. So another one of my students, Anish Sabaxankaran, has been working on some new techniques for simulating black hole fueling in galaxies. First, by using this black hole-based super Lagrangian refinement scheme. So this is just showing the structure of the mesh in the AREPO magnetohydrodynamics code, where the mesh is constructed from this Voronoi tessellation that's allowed to dynamically evolve with the gas density. And so that's this adaptive resolution that you see here is tracing the gas density. And then because we are imposing artificially extra refinement around the black hole, that's why we're calling it the super Lagrangian black hole based refinement. So this example just gives you a sense of the type of resolution that we can achieve. And so we're pushing towards being able to resolve the Bondi scale. We're not quite there yet in our production runs, but that's our goal that we're moving towards. And then, of course, the subgrid models are also very important on these scales, even more so than on larger scales. And so we've also implemented the SMUGGLE model for an explicit multi-phase interstellar medium developed by Marinacci et al. Paul Torrey was also involved in the development and is a close collaborator on this work. And so this plot here is just showing the difference on the right here in two disk galaxies, their gas density structure in the standard Springel-Hernquist effective equation of state model, where you have a very smooth overall gas density distribution, versus the SMUGGLE model, where you have very large density variations dominated by pockets of local stellar feedback that is injected locally, and stellars that are allowed to, gas that is allowed to cool to much cooler temperatures, so you get these higher density regions as well. And on the left here, you can see that the star formation rate is well self-regulated, and it has more of a variable structure than what we see from the effective equation of state model. And then the black hole, this is again the Eddington ratio on the lower plot here, where you can see that it's very stable in this isolated galaxy for the effective equation of state model, and varies by many orders of magnitude on rather short timescales in the SMUGGLE model. So this is very much in agreement with results that have been coming out of the FIRE collaboration. This is a similar type of ISM model, and Anish is doing the first systematic test of how black hole accretion behaves in this SMUGGLE model. So I'll just show. I'm not going to show any quantitative results today, but this is just a very cool set of images that he made. So of this ongoing merger shown from a face-on and an edge-on view. And the preliminary results that we're seeing out of this is that these violent merger events do trigger bursts of star formation and HEN fueling, but the black hole growth is much more regulated by the local stellar feedback, and especially its duty cycle is much more regulated by the local stellar feedback than we see in the Springel-Hernquist model. All right, so the next thing that we want to do with this setup that I just outlined is to implement a new model for black hole feedback. So I don't have any results to show for this part, but I'll just give this little schematic outline here. So we get these beautiful large-scale outflows. This is a snapshot from the TNG simulation on large scales. I don't remember exactly what the spatial scale of that is, but hundreds of parsec, I want to say. And then that feedback is actually injected locally in a highly idealized fashion. It's this isotropic injection of thermal feedback around the black hole. And so our plan is to use this black hole-based super Lagrangian refinement scheme to resolve that initial coupling of feedback to the ISM and do a local injection of momentum that's designed to mimic fast radiative winds launched from accretion disk. And so Anish has begun working on the coding and testing for that. So stay tuned for that in the future. All right, so black hole dynamics is another area where we've been doing a lot of work lately. So this is of great interest in the context of multi-messenger signatures, because black hole binary evolution spans this enormous range in scales, all the way from first galaxy inspiral through this final parsec regime, where the efficiency of inspiral is highly uncertain and depends on these complex processes and their interplay, all the way down to the gravitational wave dominated regime at milliparsec scales. And so the time scale on which these processes happen is one of the major uncertainties in gravitational wave predictions, low frequency gravitational wave predictions, especially for LISA. And so Luke Kelly developed these post-processing binary inspiral models so that we can use Illustris data, which has resolutions of maybe a kiloparsec or even several kiloparsec in terms of when the black holes actually merge, because they're within a resolution element, and then traces all of these processes that were on that previous slide in post-processing using density profiles fit to the gas, stellar, and dark matter density distributions in the host galaxy. And so you can see here, this is an A over A dot inspiral timescale hardening plot versus separation. And you can see how there is this sort of bottleneck, tendency for there to be a bottleneck in this parsec scale regime here, where the efficiency of lost cone stellar scattering increases because that inner region of stars is depleted by being ejected by the black hole binary, and gas drag may or may not take over right away to drive the black hole to the gravitational wave regime. So Luke has used these models to make lots of predictions, especially for pulsar timing arrays. So this is just one example of a set of realizations of this gravitational wave background I described, of all black hole binaries emitting signals. And so that's what these little dots are individual black hole binaries from the simulation, and different realizations in different colors, where the background overall is shown with the line for each realization. And then some of these points here you can see that pop well above the background could potentially be identified as so-called continuous wave sources, as single sources where we can say there's a spike at this one gravitational wave frequency, just like you're seeing an electromagnetic emission line at a particular frequency, and that tells us that we've got a actual binary that we're resolving above this background. And so this is the type of signature, this gravitational wave background is the type of signature that we're hoping to see with nanograv or the pulsar timing arrays in the near future. And one of the results of this particular study was that these single sources are more likely to be observed than was previously thought as well. So I mentioned at the beginning, the nanograv PTA collaboration has seen some very interesting things in the 12.5-year data. So this violin plot on the left is showing the angular correlation of pulse timing versus the angle between pairs of pulsars on the sky. And so the orange line is just the flat correlation that we expect if there's no gravitational wave signature at all. And then this blue curve is the so-called Hellings and Downs curve, which is this prediction for what we should observe for this angular correlation if it indeed comes from gravitational waves, creating these pulsar timing deviations. So it does look like we're seeing something that is different than flat, and it is not, as I said, is significant enough to call it a gravitational wave detection yet. The plot on the right here is showing how different fits to the data are consistent with this power law index that we expect from the analytic prediction for a gravitational wave background, which is shown in the vertical dashed line here. So stay tuned. The 15-year data is being analyzed right now and should be coming out sometime in the next year. So stay tuned for that. And so, as I said, this uncertainty of the black hole inspiral timescales is a big limitation on our ability to understand black hole merger rates, and that's most important for LISA. Pulsar timing arrays are less sensitive to these merger rates because they're focused on the massive unmerged supermassive black hole binaries that dominate the population. But for LISA, these merger rates vary substantially depending on the exact inspiral model that we assume, all those different physical processes that I described. And so constraining this better is going to be very important for LISA. And so on the one hand, electromagnetic constraints for black hole binaries is a major and important effort on this front that a lot of people are working very hard on. And then hopefully the Vera Rubin Observatory will provide us a lot of new insight with many, many new black hole binary candidates. But we also need more robust theoretical predictions. And so that's part of what we're working towards as well. And then just to throw another wrench into the whole process here, there's also a lot of uncertainty about the role of triple black holes in gravitational wave source formation. So, there's a lot we don't know about black hole binary and spiral, let alone triples, but it is pretty clear that triple black holes should occur, that there's plenty of opportunity for black holes to take long enough to merge, that another black hole can be brought in by a subsequent galaxy merger. And indeed, Ryan Fifley found a very nice example of this in this ongoing galaxy group merger, in which all of these are within 10 kiloparsec of each other, and each of these nuclei contains evidence for an AGN. So certainly these multiple mergers are happening. And then the question is, do they actually form strong three-body interacting triples at some later point in time? And how does that affect the gravitational wave event rate? And so this is one thing that my student who just graduated, Mohammed Sayeb, has been working on, and almost has a paper completed studying the overlap in black hole inspiral timescales in the Illustris simulation. And so the schematic here is that we have, cases where there's an overlap in the inner binary hasn't merged yet when another merger happens. But if we use our binary inspiral models, we see that the second binary never overtakes the first one. All right, so there's no crossing point here where the second binary separation becomes smaller than the first binary separation. So it just chases that binary to merger. So you might see it at some point as a system like this, but it would not have a strong three-body dynamical interaction. And then there's also cases like this where there is a crossing point, but it happens at large separation. So and again, this could be a nice example of that kind of system where you have a black hole that falls in, and maybe maybe this is the one that just fell in, and it's going to overtake this one at some point and merge with the first one before this one does, just hypothetically speaking. So that's what we're classifying as weak triples, these ones that get overtaken at more like 100 parsec separations or kiloparsec separations. And then there's also some of these that we're calling strong triples, where the overtaking point happens around the parsec scale, parsec or tens of parsec scales. And so those are the ones that are most likely to undergo a dynamical three-body interaction, the outcome of which could be to eject the lightest black hole and greatly reduce the merger time of the inner black hole. And so one of the very interesting things that Mohammed found is that this population is bimodal. So we have this cloud of these weak triples out here, where the overtaking happens at large separation. And then we have a smaller population of these strong triples that are clustered around separations of a parsec. And so that motivates the calling these two different populations here. And we drew the separating line at 100 parsec here. And we find that overall, there's a lot of systems that overlap in time. So 35% of the systems overlap in time, and that is the first binary hasn't finished merging when the second binary merger happens in the simulation. And more than 20% of all of these, all binaries form, so most of these overlapping ones do form triples. There's some overtaking at some point in time, but only about a fourth of them, or about 5% of all binaries, form these strong triples. And this 5% number, this a few percent, is surprisingly insensitive to the binary and spiral model parameters. So when we make stellar scattering more efficient, for example, to drive the black holes together faster, that seems to both pull strong triples out of this band faster and bring new ones in faster. So this seems to be a fairly robust result. So as I said, this should be submitted very soon, so stay tuned for that. And then another thing that Mohammed focused on was developing this model for black hole spin evolution. And I think I'm a little bit short on time here, so I'm not going to spend a ton of time explaining all this in detail. You're welcome to ask me about it later. But basically, we know even less about black hole spins than we do about all the other stuff we're talking about thus far. But we know that gravitational torques from a circumbinary gas disk can preferentially align or potentially anti-align in some cases the spin vectors, and will also spin up the black hole if there's coherent accretion, or if we have chaotic accretion or just not much gas at all, spin vectors are more likely to tend towards random. And then misaligned spins will undergo GR precession in the gravitational wave dominated phase. So the other reason that these are interesting is because misaligned spins are likely to produce much higher gravitational wave recoil kicks at merger. So anytime you have asymmetry in the merging black hole system, you get asymmetric gravitational wave emission. And at the moment of merger, this leads to a net linear momentum flux away from the center of mass of the system that causes the black hole to recoil in the opposite direction. And in extreme cases, this can be up to 5,000 kilometers per second. And if the spins are perfectly aligned, it can be less than 200 kilometers per second maximum. So this spin alignment thing is very important for whether or not black holes get retained in galaxies and how that might affect their subsequent mergers. And so what Mohammed showed in developing this model, so he looked at the inspiral timescales versus alignment timescales in the gas-driven phase, and found that even in our most conservative model that tends towards aligning the black holes more strongly, a significant fraction, a minority, but it's a significant minority of 10 to 20% of all binaries are misaligned when they enter that gravitational wave phase. And if we relax some of the accretion assumptions, so we don't have as much alignment, we find that up to 90% of these black holes can be misaligned at the onset of the gravitational wave phase. And then he used this precession code developed by David Drosa and Mike Kesden to actually evolve the black hole spins through that latter phase and make predictions for the recoil velocities that result. And so we find that there is a tail of high velocity recoils even in the conservative model. So this black line here is our conservative fiducial model. The gray lines are showing if you had all aligned spin or nearly aligned spins, and the dashed dot line is if you had all random spins. And so you can see how these populate the region in between that. And in all cases, there's this tail of high velocity recoils. So this is interesting, obviously, for whether or not we could see offset black holes. And also, it's possible that some of these could be seen as precessing waveforms if they were detected with Blecha. So I'll just mention that there's been a lot of work to find these offset sources as offset AGN, and this is ongoing. And so yeah, ask me if you want to talk in more detail about searches for these objects. And then I'll just spend my last couple of minutes talking about black hole formation, which is something that we've been increasingly focusing on of late. So this has been a perennial puzzle because of the growing population of billion solar mass black holes observed at very early times, less than 1 gigayear after the Big Bang. And so the question is, how did these things form and get so massive in such a short time? And so obviously for JWST, this is a very interesting question. JWST is going to really push the frontiers of what we know about this high redshift AGN population. And right now, a lot of the ideas about how black holes formed are based on these theoretical models, and so which fall into 3 broad categories. Light seeds that we know will form as the remnants of the first massive stars, but then they probably require super Eddington accretion to actually produce massive quasars, by those early times at least. Heavy seeds, which would be easier to grow to the supermassive regime, but likely require fine-tuned conditions for this direct collapse scenario to occur. And then there may be intermediate seeds that form from some runaway merger process in a dense nuclear stellar cluster in the early universe. But we have basically no empirical constraints on any of these at this point. So my student, Annalise Evans, has developed the semi-analytic prescription for identifying potential black hole seeding sites in TNG. So we're basically completely ignoring the actual black hole population in TNG, and then looking at the high redshift halo properties and making cuts based on which ones we think might be able to form black holes under certain assumptions. And then we evolve that through the merger tree, the halo merger tree, and predict the number density of black holes at each redshift. And so we don't have any information about black hole growth, but we can predict the evolution of the black hole number density. And we do, it's not being shown here, but we do reproduce the TNG black hole number density. So we've done that check. And then this blue point here is showing a data point from Merloni and Hines. These are recently made plots, and Lace is working now to put some more empirical data on this plot up to higher redshifts so we can constrain this more. But the main point for now is that I think this is a highly flexible prescription that doesn't rely on whatever seeding model is actually used in a simulation, but still is able to use the halo properties from the simulation and to provide more information than you would get from a semi-analytic model alone. And then finally, my postdoc, Clint Bomek, has been developing new models for gas-based seeding directly in cosmological simulations. And so this first study was a systematic parameter study of black hole seeding criteria, focusing on seeding in metal poor star forming regions, so regions that have just recently started forming stars. And so one conclusion from that work is that if we vary the total halo mass criterion for seeding, that has the most dramatic effect at the highest redshifts, redshifts greater than 10 or 11 or so. And this is just showing the black hole merger rate here. We see similar things if we just plot the black hole mass or number density. But then at lower redshifts, below redshift of 10 or 11, this star-forming metal poor gas mass criterion becomes more important for determining the merger rate. So there's sort of this turnover there. And of course, the merger rate depends strongly on the seed mass as well. That's not being shown here, but it's also something we found. So then he has submitted another paper showing what happens if we impose on top of that Lyman-Werner flux criterion. So saying that we need a minimum UV flux to prevent fragmentation of the collapsing gas cloud, and also a criterion on the maximum gas angular momentum for a halo. And this does greatly reduce the number of seeding sites that we see. Again, I won't go into too much detail since I know I'm running out of time here, but feel free to ask me more about that. And then finally, he's also working on this third paper using constrained initial conditions, which allows us to simulate rare overdensities without having to first simulate an enormous volume at lower resolution, find the rare high density region we want and resimulate that in a zoom simulation. Instead, we can impose constrain the initial conditions to produce this rare high density peak itself. And then we're probing the massive seed formation in those regions. All right, so I'll end there and put up the schematic again by way of summary and take any questions.
Great, let's thank Laura for that fantastic talk. So I guess we'll start with questions. Oh, Anil, yeah.
Hi, really nice talk, Laura. I was wondering if you thought a little bit about, you were talking about the very high resolution simulations where you're resolving the Bondi scale or close to resolving the Bondi scale. I guess I'm just wondering, are you also tracking star formation in that on those scales, and do you see some kind of correlation between black hole growth and star formation on the very nuclear scales, kind of?
So yes, so we definitely see that the black hole growth is very sensitive to what's going on with the local stellar feedback, right? So there's just pockets of very low density gas, very close to pockets of very high density gas, and wherever the black hole ends up at any given point in time has a dramatic impact on what the black hole's instantaneous accretion rate is. So there are some finer points in a numerical sense that we're still trying to work out in terms of how to push the star formation model all the way down to these resolutions. But yeah, as the resolutions we're probing, I would say this is clearly a generic conclusion that we're seeing some global trends with whatever is going on in the galaxy and differences between different types of galaxies that follow global trends, but locally, it's just the orders of magnitude variation. You're essentially turning the black hole accretion on and off like with a switch based on whether it's in one of these high density or low density regions almost.
Great. Vivian?
Fantastic talk. I was wondering, for your multiple supermassive black hole systems, dual or more, do you have constraints on like how many of them would appear as AGN versus quiescent based on accretion rates, say?
We do not. That's not something that we're going to be looking at in this initial paper, although it's something that I'm very interested to look at more in the future. But because all of this is happening on sub-resolution scales, we do have information about the instantaneous accretion rate. I think that, so the last thing that Mohammed was doing before we submit this paper was to put some numbers on, like what fraction of binaries are in these triple, just all black holes, and what fraction of binary black holes are in these triple systems at any given point of, cosmological time. But yeah, we're going to have to do more detailed analysis in the future to look at to pair that with accretion rates, and that's definitely on the list.
Any other questions? Thanks, Vivian. So I have questions. Usually, or Gabby, did you have a question?
No, you go first, then me.
Oh, okay. Yes, because I'm the host, so I have to wait for other people. But yeah, this is fantastic work. I'm just amazed at how many different projects you're working on. I guess I was just wanting to kind of zoom out and ask your perspective on, I guess, the electromagnetic constraints on, supermassive black hole binary evolution in light of upcoming facilities. You know, JWST is only going to have 0.2 arc seconds spatial resolution. We got the decadal report, and just wondered if, you know, you had a sense for where we're going to get the most constraints and what form they're going to take.
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. And yeah, I mean, I didn't really talk about the EM searches for binaries because, you know, we're not really actively working on that in my group at the moment. But I think it's a tough problem, and my inclination is that you know, this is the kind of thing that's going to have to be tackled from a bunch of different angles. I am hopeful that, you know, Vera Rubin LSST is going to really push us forward in understanding what types of signatures produce you know, robust binary candidates. But even then, it still takes a long baseline, a time baseline of follow-up to actually, you know, be sure. In GVLA, I think is an exciting avenue, especially with a long baseline option. So in terms of looking to the next decade, I think that's has a lot of potential in terms of actually finding bound binaries or things that are close to bound. Because as you said, yeah, JWST isn't going to really probe those scales. But I think, yeah, I know that's not a very satisfying answer, but I think it's just, it's a tough problem, and we're going to have to just tackle it from as many angles as we can.
Gabby, did you want to ask a question?
Yeah.
I had a few more, but
Yeah, I wanted to take you up on your offer to tell us more about the offset the offset AGN searches.
Yeah. So yeah, so I guess the most recent update to this slide was this paper published led by Drew Hogg, who was a graduate student at Maryland, who's now graduated and is working in the private sector, but still impressively managed to finish up this paper and get it through the referee process while holding down a full-time job. And so this was looking at this system that was identified, much as this CMOS object, as and others that had a offset between the broad and narrow emission lines. So for people who not been following this field closely, this is one of the signatures that's been predicted for these offset AGN, because the broad lines are in a region that should be gravitationally bound to the black hole as it recoils. The narrow lines will be illuminated from larger distances, and so are expected to be more at the systemic redshift of the host galaxy. So that was what flagged this system, and then we got this nice imaging of this source from HST, showing that there is this what looks like a highly asymmetrical galaxy. There's clearly an interaction going on with this thing. So it's definitely an active, highly disturbed system. And it's not really clear to what extent that this corresponds to a physical offset of this from the center of the galaxy. So we're hoping to get a better constraint on the kinematics of the galaxy with ALMA and other observations. So unfortunately, this object falls into the category that all the others do on this slide, where I think it's a really interesting candidate, but it's just, we can't really tell with the amount of data we have right now exactly what's going on there. So I think that's sort of the bottom line, I would say, is that this really is a very tough problem to confirm these candidates one way or the other. There is another paper, I believe, that will be coming out on this source in the not too distant future. But yeah, the kind of thing that, again, I'm hoping, still hopeful that with larger surveys and like the time domain, I really like this idea. It was one of Suvi Gazari's students published a paper several years ago looking at offset stochastically variable sources as distinct from supernova transients or nuclear stochastically variable sources as a means of identifying these offset AGNs. So I'm hopeful that Barry Rubin will identify some low-hanging fruit if it's out there. But in the meantime, yeah, we've got a lot of weird types of mergers, some of which may be recoils, and that's kind of where we're at.
So how was this target identified? Was it a serendipitous or part of a large search? Or
this was identified in a search in the SDSS quasar spectral database, and it's been a few years now since Drew found this source, but yeah, so it was definitely serendipitous. It wasn't what he went looking for, but I actually don't remember now what the parameters of that search, what he was actually looking for when he found this source. So yeah.
Okay, thank you. I can look it up.
Any other questions? Can I just ask one more? I won't hog up the questions, but I guess going back to the electromagnetic signatures for supermassive black hole binaries, one question I had, because in our dual searches, clearly we've shown, your work has shown and observations have shown that obscuration is significant, right? And that we're not finding these accreting duals. So I just wondered, when they get closer together, can we see them, or are we still going to have that problem where we need to go look for electromagnetic signatures at longer wavelengths?
So you're talking specifically about like optical and soft X-ray?
Yeah, basically, the reason I ask this is because, when you look at upcoming facilities and what we can do with what we have, you can achieve much higher spatial resolution from the ground and the optical, right? Because, the diffraction limit is higher, like you get better spatial resolution and you can build bigger telescopes. But I just wondered, if you can achieve the spatial resolution to probe these much smaller spatial scales, is that not going to really work because, they'll be expected to be obscured at these closer, pair separations. And I don't really know the answer to that.
Yeah, I think it's a pretty serious concern in trying to, if you're thinking about like, I don't know, 30-meter telescope, observations of these candidates or whatever, like, I think that you have a hard time seeing dual nuclei in a lot of these types of actively merging systems, which is, partly why I am hopeful about the NGBLA as an avenue forwards, so the radio being another band where you don't have to worry about the attenuation in the same way. So I think I think with the time domain aspect, right? If there are systems that are unobscured, then that provides us a whole new angle for trying to identify them. But just in general, especially if we have like a sample of merging systems that are clearly merging and highly disturbed, then yeah, I think the obscuration is going to be a big challenge for the optical bands.
Yeah, so I wasn't sure if even if you're at parsec scale separations, or even less than a parsec, which can be achievable in nearby AGNs, I guess you're saying it would still be a concern.
Yeah, there's always the possibility that these merger timescales are long in some of these systems. And so by the time the black hole merger timescales, and so by the time the black holes actually get to parsec separations or near it, then maybe the galaxy has settled down and obscuration isn't as big of a deal. So maybe that would be one saving grace in those systems. But yeah, I don't think we have a super good handle on how common that is yet.
Great. And any other questions, anybody? So I think we,
Oh, sorry, Shavita.
oh, Jeffrey, yeah, I was going to ask you, is that Jeffrey who just talked?
Yeah, that's me. That's me.
Okay. Yes, I was wondering if you wanted to make any announcements about like the research symposium that's planned for students, the
Oh, yeah. So,
talk after this talk, or
so I'll first say for all the students in the room here, we're going to be going, if you're not already in the International AGN Alliance Discord server, please join it, because we're going to go and have a little discussion. And if Laura, you can join, that'd be great. I know you're very busy. We're gonna have a little discussion in the voice channel. Also, if you're not in there, we're having a student only symposium the second week of December, I think that Thursday. No advisors allowed, just students trying to share our research with other students for a fun, cool event. So that's just some of the events that's going on. So yeah, if you're not in the Discord server, I can send a link in the chat right now that you can use to click on to join the server. And I'll do that right now because we're going to go in there and have a nice little discussion. Yeah, and there's a link. And that's all I got.
thank you. And I think there are plans to meet at the AAS. So for anyone who's
Oh, yeah.
AAS, maybe there could be some meetup there.
Yep. If you're yeah, we're gonna hopefully plan something fun. There's been talks of, well, some people going to snowboarding, maybe, if you're into that.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. So thank you so much, Laura, for that wonderful talk. And thank you, everybody, for joining. It was a
For all
wonderful.
the questions. It's great to see everyone.
Yeah, so let's thank Laura once again.